Gratitude spell. So I'm going to pass it over to O'Brien to cast our radical gratitude spell, and then I will move forward with introing our panel.
Yes, really quickly before I join and do our radical gratitude spell, I want to just walk you through our event and everything that y'all have available for today. And so first and foremost, we are the Peer Defense Project. We're an intergenerational movement lawyering shop that focuses on supporting movements, youth-led movements to build dignity and power in schools, government, and courts. And we're putting on this event today, Open Up the Cages, to really showcase all the work that we've been doing in the abolition scene. Today we're publishing officially our guide, Abolish New York's Punishment and Carceral Systems, something that we've been working on for over a year. There's several different people that we can thank today, but first and foremost, want to thank Anna. Shout out to our prison abolition fellow, Anna. Want to shout out Kaylin Gaines, who is not here today. She is a 3L at Yale Law School who's built this for us. So really want to give her flowers. And then we just want to thank the rest of the PDP team and everybody else who's contributed. We have several different orgs represented here today. And so throughout the day, we're going to be starting off with a movement lawyering panel. After this, we'll be transitioning into a presentation on PDP and what we did and what we're doing and what is this guide about. And then we'll be ending the day off with a screening hosted by Girls for Gender Equity. So we got a really excited and packed program for y'all today. All throughout the day, we also have a community pop-up featuring BIPOC youth vendors and community organizations. So please, please, please cop up the art, participate in all the surveys and do the thing. This is our community pop-up, and we were really interested in gathering community so y'all can see what's going on in New York and how do we connect to it. We also have the very esteemed The Movement Street. Shout out to Movement Street. That is an organization that I brought with me here from DC. I'm currently a steward at Howard University where okay. I'm a sophomore. I'm dead. I'm a sophomore political science major in the BA/JD program on my way to law school. And the Movement Street is a service non-production. And so we produce streetwear and we do advocacy. So definitely check them out. We also have our artist in residence, Madison, who unfortunately could not be here with us today, but she sent her table with her art. Definitely cop up Madison's art. Shout out to Sci City. Shout out to Youth Power Coalition. Shout out to Jazz Amations, Jules by CAD, and all the other orgs and people that are here. GGE got a table back there. Please check them out. But we were really interested in bringing people together so that you can connect with each other and so that we can support each other. We also have food. So please grab munchkins, please grab coffee, please grab tea. And there's also rice and beans, rice and pastelitos. And so with all of that being said, we'll be here for Open Up the Cages. And we're gonna open up this event with a radical gratitude spell. And so I'm gonna read it and it goes something like this. A spell to cast upon meeting a stranger, comrade, or friend, working for social and/or environmental justice and liberation. You're a miracle walking. I greet you with wonder. In a world which seeks to own your joy and your imagination, you have chosen to be free. Every day, as a practice, I can never know the struggles you went through to get here. But I know you have swum upstream, and at times it has been lonely. I want you to know that I honor the choices you made in solitude, and I honor the work you have done to belong. I honor your commitment to that which is larger than yourself and your journey. To love the particular container of life, this is you. You are enough. Your work is enough. You are needed. Your work is sacred. You are here, and I am grateful. With that being said, thank you very much. I hope you enjoy Open Up the Cages, and I'll pass it to my co-exec, Sarah, to lead us off.
Okay. So I first just want to share the intention for this panel. The intention for the panel is to connect our participants with a network of attorneys and legal workers who are defending youth in the systems as they are today. Today in New York City, 1.2 million students attend the nation's most segregated schools. New York spends over $1 million per young person per year in some of our carceral facilities. This is a reality that must be transformed. The harm that is enacted on young people is unacceptable, and the folks here on this panel are taking steps in their own ways to reduce that harm and mitigate harm in the systems as they exist. Before I move on to introduce our panelists, I want to first shout out our Executive Director of People Operations, Annette Naranjo, and Miriam Salmanova, our movement lawyering paralegal, who have really helped us to center harm in our organization and think about healing. And so I want to name that these folks are attorneys and legal workers, and in their own way, they are healers, really working to heal from the systems within. And so as you're listening today, I would love for you to share this information, share this network, listen to the information that you receive, tell your friends, tell your cousins, tell your family, tell your community, because we're sharing this information so that you have that power and can move forward with autonomy and groundedness through this system that is so unfair. So to kick us off, I'd love for each of our panelists to introduce yourself with your name, your pronouns, your job title, and the organizations and communities that you claim. So I'll start, and then I'll pass it to my friend David, who's on the screen today. David, you look great on this screen. It is such a clear screen. It looks like this whole look is great up here. Okay, my name is Sarah Medina Camasholi. I am an attorney in New York. I work on discrimination and working with young people to fight for civil rights from a movement lawyering approach. You can talk to me today if you have any questions about ways that you felt you've experienced racism or bias in the school system, and you'd like to think about legal tools in terms of how to address it. And I will pass it over to Darren.
Oh, wait. Oh, David. Mm-hmm. Oh, yes, you did say me first. Hi, folks.
I did.
My name is David Simpson, and I go by he, him pronouns. I am the co-founder and co-director of the Remedy Project, an organization that my co-founder and I started for the purpose of empowering students to advocate on behalf of those who are incarcerated through the administrative remedy process, which is the official way that folks who are having any issues within a prison system is supposed to bring that issue to the officials. If they don't use this process, the administrative remedy process within the federal system to bring their issues to light, they don't have not, let's just say it simply, they have not complained or they have not raised an issue. It doesn't matter who they talk to or anything like that. Unless you do the administrative remedy process, you have not complained. And so this is recognized by the courts, government officials, and everyone else. And so at the Remedy Project, we are training students within our organization to use this process to advocate for those who are incarcerated. And, where the organization is being developed as an organization that the students will actually run and or operate, to advocate for those who are incarcerated for the purpose of bringing very much needed humanity, healing, and all the other good stuff to a prison system that is, a crisis today. Thank you.
Thanks, David. So for our other panelists, name, pronouns, job title, and organization and communities you claim.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Darren Mumphrey. She, her pronouns. I am a policy and law attorney at the Poverty and Race Research Action Council in DC. I also, through that, work with the National Coalition on School Diversity. And I am definitely very passionate about youth justice, particularly decarceration in the youth criminal sphere. I don't believe that most youth get the resources they need in their community. So I began working at PRAC to work in housing and education law. So the communities that I fight for every single day include youth, particularly African American and Brown youth. I love working in that area because in law school, I decided to create a program which consisted of a workshop and toolkit that worked on youth police relations. So all of my work is inspired by helping youth navigate this world with some agency. And I feel like I'm still a child at heart, so I will always work for youth of any kind. Oh,
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Michaela Thompson. My pronouns are she, her. I am a staff attorney with the Legal Aid Society here in New York City. I work in our juvenile rights practice, and that means I represent only children in both abuse neglect cases as well as juvenile delinquency cases. Primarily right now, I am doing education law. So I help the attorneys that represent the children in those venues work on the education matters. I'm sorry. Oh, sorry. Now can you hear me? Okay. So I represent youth and mainly in education matters. And one of the reasons why I went into that field and kind of went away from representing them in family court is because I found that if we can help handle things in the school, at the school level, we can make significant changes for these youth. As a product of the public school system, as a product of a parent who was a single parent and I lived in subsidized housing, I understand the perception that the communities around us have about us. So I'm very, very engaged in helping to make those changes in the best way I can through education. And so I represent our clients in suspension hearings. I really, really think that our suspension process in the DOE here in New York City is horrible, that they keep trying to keep youth out of school so that they end up in the prison system. And that my perspective is that if we can help empower our youth at this level as students, whether they decide to go to college or have a career or start a business, they will be contributors to their communities, and we can help our communities internally instead of relying on the public and the systems around us to take care of us.
Hi there. My name is Liam Riley. I use he, him pronouns, and I am, first I'd like to say thank you for having me here today. This panel is full of such accomplished people. I am not yet a lawyer. I am currently a law student at NYU Law. And I'm here representing Suspension Representation Project, which is a project that a coalition of New York schools are all a part of. We represent students in suspension hearings for free. It's really important to have representation there. Oftentimes families don't know what the process is like. The schools are very uncommunicative. Schools are very interested in keeping students out of school. A lot of the deans and punitive actors in the process are quite unkind to these children, and it's hard to see, but it's important that there's representation there. And I think something that we're trying to do as an organization is build our capacity to work in advocacy spheres, to help get cops out of schools, to help end school removal. And I think like relationships with organizations like Integrate NYC are great for that, so that we can do more than just represent and help empower youth, as all these organizations are doing.
Thank you so much. To folks who are recording, if you could clip this and then start a new video for each section of the panel, that would be great. Okay. So the first question that I have for folks, and David, please you're behind me right now, so I'm going to pass it to you first and then move down the panel. We're here today to talk about youth abolition of youth punishment systems, a movement in which we have had the Peer Defense Project really start to do research in terms of how young people identify harm, specifically how young people identify systems that don't serve them, and then what it looks like to have a plan and a strategy to take down those systems and rebuild them anew. And so we believe that each of you has made an impact in terms of reducing the harm that a lot of the carceral systems have created. And so we'd love for you to just share a little bit about specifically which system do you work with, what's the name of it, how might people recognize it if they don't recognize the name, and how does that system cause harm to young people? Specifically young people meaning ages 9 to age 25. And for everyone who's in the audience, I would love if you could open up the guide and check out, there's in our first chapter, a big web. And you can see all of the different systems that folks here represent. So I'm gonna pass it over to David first at the Remedy Project. David, what is the name of the system that you work and do some defense in, and how does that system cause harm to young people between the ages of 9 to 25? David's frozen. Okay, I'm gonna pass to Darren. And I'm gonna go Darren first, and then we'll get back to David once the Wi-Fi clicks back in.
So I will say the criminal justice system, but I kind of want to say system involvement as a whole is what I seek to protect youth from, because court involvement in any capacity and involvement in social systems can traumatize youth and it can stunt their growth. So I work a lot in housing. I do most of my job is reform of the housing choice voucher program. So not only am I lobbying with the government to put more money into the program to give people more vouchers, I'm seeking funding for organizing within the program, because when you have a housing voucher, you're put anywhere that will take the voucher. There's no sense of real community. The PHAs, the public housing authorities, don't really facilitate any sense of community. So organizing with other voucher holders is hard. And what else is hard when you can't organizing is advocating for yourself. So you're stuck in this process that can leave you homeless if your landlord decides to raise the rent. And homelessness pushes children into all sorts of systems. So I seek every day, it's like a real cognizant part of my planning when I'm planning what am I going to say to HUD, is how can we keep children from becoming system involved by providing resources in housing, because children are homeless and we still expect them to go to school. And then when they can't show up, we suspend them. And then if they're acting out because they don't have anywhere to sleep at night, we suspend them and expel them or arrest them, or if they're trying to find somewhere to hang out that's safe for a few hours, we're arresting them too. So we're pushing children into the system because they don't have anywhere to live. And whose fault is that? So I'm really conscious about keeping children out of the criminal justice system, but definitely out of social services. Anything that seeks to break up their homes, anything that seeks to take them out of environments that are loving and that are adultified. So you all probably have heard that brown and black children are adultified much more than, white children. Systems do that. Systems treat children like adults. System treats adults like animals. So do we really want children being treated like that while their brains are still developing? So that is pretty much always in the back of my mind whenever I'm doing any sort of work in housing. It always ties back to decarceration and youth justice.
So, so the main systems that I work within are family court here in New York City, as well as the New York City Department of Education. So the school system, the school district, I guess, if you will. And like previously stated, that serving or allegedly serving 1.2 million children across it. The way it harms, like Darren just said, involvement in the system is a harm in and of itself. As a person who is assigned to a child as their attorney, I know immediately I am a traumatic force in their life, because no child should have to work with an attorney and deal with a court system as a part of their normal everyday practice. And so I acknowledge first and foremost that it's traumatizing to even know that I exist. And to have to explain to a child, it's traumatizing for them, for me to have to say to them why I'm even in their lives. And so what I oftentimes do, especially when I represented the children in family court, I would pull the family aside, the parent or whoever the caregiver was that case got into court revolving around, and just point blank tell them with their attorney present, because that's the only way I can talk to them, that they need to find the supports in their community so that they can get the system out as soon as possible. The people are brainwashed, and children especially, to rely on case planners and caseworkers and police officers. And so I had a case once where a parent on the stand in court said, after she had engaged in a domestic violent event with her partner, the first person she called was her caseworker from ACS, not the police, not her parent, not an adult she trusted, the caseworker, because this system's brainwashed, and that is harmful for children as well as adults. And so one of the ways that I try to defend my clients and help my clients is try to figure out how I can uplift them through education, through acknowledging that there are ways to break out of this cycle so that they can continue to help their communities. I'm not trying to get them away from their communities because I don't think their communities are problematic. But I think that our greater society has this belief that they have to save us from ourselves. And so if we don't help our children break and meander through our education system so that they can then break out and do whatever it is that they're purposed to do, we will continue to have systems that prey on our children, that suspend them for not going to school, that suspend them for acting out in class, that suspend them and then eventually incarcerate them for minor offenses where they should be able to get rehabilitation help or other things in their lives before we jump to prison. The prison industry is a profitable industry for those who make money off of it, but it is damaging for our community. And so we need to get to our youth at the ground level, at kindergarten. How do we get more of our youth in gifted and talented programs? How do we get more of our youth access to different programs where they can see that they are valuable? There's a table here in this arena that talks about motivating and positive mindset for girls and individuals. That is what we have to reinforce. And so the first thing I try to do is tell these children that they are valuable no matter what the system has said. And then I go against the system head for head and making sure that these kids stay in school and away from the systems around them. Oh, yeah, David.
David.
Sorry. Oh, he's mute.
My service just dropped. I have no idea what that was, but I'm glad to be back.
Yeah,
okay. All right, so I was explaining that the system that I work with is the Federal Bureau of Prisons. It's the federal prison system here in the United States of America. And this prison system affects youth not in a grandiose scale. It's a minute scale, but when it does affect our youth, it hurts them and hurts them really bad. And I'll tell you why. So folks get caught up in the federal system if they are, or youth get caught up in the federal system if they are involved in any federal crime. And what that happens is there is rules and regulations pertaining to how that system treats youth. And one of the things is it has to isolate the youth. So early on, when a young person comes into the Federal Bureau of Prisons they are isolated from the general public until they are of can be seen as adult age, right? And so you go from, so it doesn't matter what your crime was or what you're suspected of, whether you were found guilty or not. From the time you are incarcerated or held within the Federal Bureau of Prisons, you're isolated from population. And this isolation can be harming and damaging to youth, not understanding what they're going through, what's happening. The federal system is kind of like scary to folks. They believe that it's vastly different from the state and can it's something that's more dangerous and more serious. And in some cases that is. But all these things go through their head and now you're isolated from the rest of the population if you're under a certain age. And that can be extremely scary and worrisome for kids. And when you are old enough to be placed in the regular population, now you're kind of like, at the end of the day, kind of like up for grabs with those who are in the system, whether official or incarcerated person that might want to take advantage of a young person, of their innocence or ignorance to the system and so on and so forth. So there, it's really difficult place to navigate for a young person. It's hard to identify who is a safe peer to connect with within the federal prison system, to kind of like protect yourself and help guide. There is no programs and or the structure to support folks who are incarcerated, to support youth that are incarcerated in the federal system. And the only thing that they have to go for them is the administrative remedy process, which is not taught in the system. Most folks, a high percentage, I would guesstimate, and this is my numbers, it doesn't have to be accurate, but I would say that is about 95% of the folks in the federal system do not know how to use and or utilize the administrative remedy process, which is necessary for them to any great effect. And it's a few of us that do, and those of us that did and or do face a lot of retaliation, suppression, and all sorts of treatment for utilizing the system, because the folks who run the system don't want you using it. And so you have it hard in the federal system, but it's not a place where they're incarcerated in mass as they are in the state. However, one of the things to look out for is, as we at the Remedy Project start getting things in place, because we are a young organization, and we intend to extend our program or duplicate our program for the states. We intend to be a nationwide organization, a nationwide program. By then, we could get more involved into youth prisons and so on and so forth, once we get the appropriate funding and support to help duplicate ourselves into these systems.
So Suspension Representation Project works with the Department of Education in New York City. For any student that is sentenced to more than 5 days for suspension, they have a right to a hearing, and then that goes to each borough has a hearing office. It isn't a formal courtroom, but it follows some of the same procedures. You have an court official there that is charged with the job of determining whether the alleged incident actually occurred or not. The school will come and oftentimes falsify things, bring in witnesses, I think a lot of the time what is happening is schools are overworked, and rather than deal with issues productively and help students get connected to the resources that they need, they think it's easier to just force them out of the school for however long. Oftentimes these suspensions then build on one another because students get behind, students don't have the socialization that they should be having. And the way that these hearings go is that oftentimes the dean or the teacher's word is treated as completely factual. Definitely, they would never be lying, while the students' own accounts of what happened are sometimes ignored. They sort of assert that a kid doesn't really understand what's going on. And it isn't just traumatic for the student that is facing suspension. Oftentimes they bring in other student witnesses and force 12-year-olds to incriminate their friends, I've even had a student that got a text from another student the day of that said, oh, well, I have to testify at this. The dean said that I would be facing suspension if I don't say X, Y, and Z things today. And that's scary. And I mean, the worst part of what my job in this situation is having to cross-examine students, because it's not fun to interrogate a child, just to help your client face less punitive measures. And yeah, it's very difficult, and we try to keep the kids as supported and comfortable through the whole process, while also having to forcefully advocate. And I think it can be jarring for them in the same way that you were talking about, to see me sort of aggressively question deans after we'd had friendly conversations about what their hobbies are and what they want to do with their life. And yeah, it's just not a space that's productive for like ongoing productive engagement with schools. Oftentimes kids come out of these meetings with more distrust for their deans, people that they're going to see every day. They want to transfer schools sometimes, and then the schools won't let them. It just becomes a very difficult environment.
Okay, so I want to acknowledge that we really just went through how these systems are. And this is a lot of trauma that we've just talked about, a lot of pain. And so I want to take a moment for us just to process. If we could clip recording for just a moment. Okay, so I'm gonna ask everyone to feel your feet on the ground. Okay, we're gonna ground for a second. Take a breath. Okay, take a look at the door. You can leave whenever you would like. I think sometimes when we have these conversations, it feels like we're stuck in them. You can leave, you can take a break. Touch any part of your body that feels a little tense. And take a moment, I would ask, to turn to someone next to you, if you feel comfortable, and talk about something that's coming up for you, maybe. What's something you're thinking about, a memory you have, a story maybe you have, a feeling you have. Panelists, I invite you to do the same thing, something new that you learned. And after we do that turn and talk for about a minute, then we're gonna create a little space here for people to ask questions about as the system is now. Then we'll jump into some questions with our panelists about abolition and what that might mean to you. Cool? I just want to take about a minute. Talk to a person next to you, something you've learned, something that's coming up. If no one's next to you, scoot on over, join a little duo. Okay, so I really loved what you were sharing about
my dad is from here.
that what's
my grandma lives
driving
here, so
you in the system's
I go
work
to NYU.
is to keep
So are you
people
gonna go
out.
back home after this semester?
Like almost like bodyguarding.
I'm from Minneapolis, and
Oh, okay.
I'm interning at the public defender's office there this summer. Yeah.
Are you excited about it?
Yeah, I'm really excited. I eventually want to end up doing juvenile defense, and this is
okay, so
sort of
this
a
is-
generalized
yeah.
internship, but they'll
Yeah.
expose us to the different courts
Yeah, it's
in the
good.
city.
First year, usually, first summer,
Yeah.
is usually like you get just getting access. So that's good. Are you excited about it?
Yeah, I am excited. It'll be nice. Like
You're doing good work because what I do, we often take cases from you guys. If the child's arrested, you can't take it.
Yeah, we can't.
So we pick it up if there's an arrest. That's oftentimes I talk to a lot of the SRP students, and they're like, I have to take this case because the child was arrested. And sometimes nothing ever happens, but the minute that arrest happens, it kind of keeps you guys out of the.
We've been like discussing that a lot. I'm currently just a 1L representative
Yeah,
on the
yeah,
board,
yeah.
but next year, like I hope to be co-chair of our chapter at, and it's something with needing a faculty advisor if we were to take on any, because what happens is we could get subpoenaed in any criminal case and forced to testify against our students. So yeah, for the time being, we put all those off.
Yeah.
Do you think
But
that
there's a lot of demand, I would say,
have you ever heard
especially
people,
once
have
we're
you
getting
ever-
towards the end
do you
of
think
the
it's effective
semester.
to say,
It's
this is something I
unfortunate
think
because a
about,
lot
like,
of
carceral
our advocates'
facilities are
availability goes
state
down,
housing,
and
and like
yeah, and
they're
like, I have,
paying
like,
for them
basic
as state
Spanish
housing,
skills,
and that's the
but
housing
I
the
keep
state's
getting assigned to,
providing.
like, the
And
ESL
what
cases, and
what
I'm
we
like,
should be talking
there
about
really
is
should be someone
divesting
who
from that
can
kind
more
of
effectively
punitive,
communicate with
dehumanizing
these
housing
parents. Yeah.
and reinstating it, because that's something that I
Yeah.
have just
This
wondered
year,
about
though,
in
I
terms
mean,
of
I know
like
this
how
is
much
your
the state
first
is
year probably
investing
involved.
in
This has
harmful
been
forms of
an
shelter or housing. I can't think about it, but
It's like I did some. Well, not. I started in the education side right before the pandemic. I did a few suspensions, but on a 5-day week, I've done at least 4
Yeah.
in a week, which is insane. It's
Yeah.
just-
The
And that's
offices
just
are
one
always
borough.
very packed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like, what is
So it's unfortunate because it's saying that the schools, well, the DOE is just responding poorly to the fact that these kids just came out of a pandemic, or not that it's over, but like they were home, they were kind of enclosed, and some of the things that are happening, I feel like could be remedied right in the school. Like
Yeah.
sending kids home for 5, 6, 10, 20 days, and they've been behind. So it's like,
Yeah.
and
I mean, it's hard to relearn like socialization with peers and
Yeah.
such. Like,
right. But I feel like they should have done a better job of like managing that rather than, okay, you're suspended.
Because their values are not.
Also, too, it's like they know, like, and I tell this to parents the minute.
All right, y'all, once you feel like you've kind of gotten into the conversation, gotten something out of it, I would love to just elevate some learning, some voices, some questions, some affirmations to the panelists. I think often in panels, like you sit up here, people talk, you're like thinking about 80 things, and then like the information doesn't really flow. So I'd like to kind of disrupt that for a second. And I actually don't have a question. I actually have an affirmation. And then like I wanted to open it up if anyone here wanted to ask a question or provide an affirmation. So I wanted to affirm Darren. I specifically wanted to affirm the way that Darren is talking about housing as a form of, the way that state-run housing is functioning as a form of punishment, and that folks are punished in the places that people choose to be their homes. And that if we continue to punish people and make people earn home, that's gonna be a space where punishment's gonna continue and cause harm. And so I really appreciate you talking about home and housing as something that shouldn't have to be earned, and the way that a requirement to having to earn that creates just a system of punishment and harm. So I wanted to create space here. Does anyone have any questions they want to ask the panelists about as the system is now, and any of the work that they do? Any affirmations? Yeah. Oh, hold on.
I have to stand up or no? Okay. My name is Aaliyah. Thank you for the panel. All of you guys' work is great. The question I had was specifically about your work and if there are any efforts to center the voices of the young people in the systems that you're talking about that are directly impacted. If there's anything that you guys do to give them the space and the opportunity to speak about what's happening to them and create solutions, if you guys offer that and all the work that you do.
And before we jump to the panel, anyone else have another question? I saw a hand here. Any other questions? Okay, we'll stack this question. Okay.
Hi, my name is Carlene, and my question is, what made you all choose the systems that you're in right now? Like, what pushed you into family courts or housing or suspension versus anything else?
Okay, cool. So let's go first to this intro question about what brought people, and then let's move to this question about youth, and then we'll move into the segment about abolition. Okay, so anyone who wants to start with what brought you to the area that you're doing work?
You sure? Okay. Okay, so what brought me to this area? I originally decided I wanted to go to law school to be an education lawyer due to personal experience in my family. I wanted to advocate for those individuals who couldn't afford a lawyer out of pocket, and knowing I was gonna represent those children for free or low bono was really important to me. I went into education law, specifically doing suspensions as well, because I realized that working in family court was not enough for me. I wasn't getting the outcomes for my clients that I wanted. I wasn't able to push in the same way. And so I'll just combine the second question. I try my best when I'm representing each client to understand what brought them in front of me. Why are they, why were they suspended? Why are they struggling in their home? Why was this case called to family court? So that they can have the floor to explain to me what's happening. And the beauty is, because I'm an attorney and I'm in the space of advocacy, that conversation is confidential. So they can be free to really express themselves, and we can strategize together how to move forward. And so I really, really enjoy giving them that space to find the best solution that works for them, that's realistic. I oftentimes have clients, especially clients who are suspended, who may not even be going to school one day out of a 5-day school week. And so let's figure out how we can help change that so that you can be more empowered, especially as in these settings of suspensions or family court. So if they don't have if they're not bought into it, I can't do very much. And so I need them to see that, one, they're valuable, and that what they're saying is valuable, and then we can proceed forward to advocating for them in the best possible way for them, not for the system.
David,
All right.
would you want to share a little bit about what brought you into the specific system that you work in?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so I was wrongfully incarcerated and sentenced to 11 and a half years, of which I spent 10 inside the Federal Bureau of Prisons. So I was let's say a casualty of the war on drugs, right? So my situation similarly went to where there was a young lady that came into the airport on behalf of some friends of mine. I guess he was trying, a very good friend, a childhood friend, he was trying to get into another gang or whatever it was that dealt with drugs, and he was trying to prove himself, and he must have used a young lady to try to show that he could do what they do, which is transport drugs from the islands to the United States of America. Things didn't go good with the person that was supposed to pick her up. I think he had to go to work, and they asked me if I could pick the person up for him, went to pick the person up, and the person apparently was bringing what is called lidocaine on them. It's a drug like aspirin, or so a legal drug, not an illegal drug. However, the young lady told the agents that it was, she was supposed to have bring illegal drugs, and who was involved. The ICE agents got with me and said, hey, the young lady told us what's going on, and that you have linked to these folks. Let us do a sting. We'll put a wire on you and follow you with helicopters and cars, and we want you to take this lady to the person that was supposed to pick her up. And I said, well, no, I can't do that, because they told me to take her home. And besides that, I was kind of aware that, folks who get involved with stuff like that, their family members in Trinidad could be hurt by getting involved to that extent in such a thing. So, I declined and asked my lawyer, and they promised me, well, hey, if you don't cooperate with us, we'll make sure that you don't see your family for a really long time. And so they did, even though what I was arrested for, the young lady that I was arrested for picking up did not commit a crime, because she did not have illegal drugs coming into the United States. What she ended up having was lidocaine. To prove their point, they went and they got another lady who was a part of the original drug gang, and had her change her story to include me in it, so that I then became, the kingpin and or leader of this drug operation. And they simply manipulated some stuff pertaining to me, my phone use, and where my car was, because I was close with my friends, that did this stuff. And they found it, I was found guilty and sent to prison. And while in there, that's when I started seeing the horrors of what folks go through in the prison system. I was taught how to defend myself early on, because I was retaliated against immediately in the prison system, because I wrote a letter on behalf of a guy who had cancer that had a really bad episode. And I wrote a letter to his judge. And the judge blasted the prison system and the prosecutors for that. And they quickly retaliated. As soon as I was sentenced, they sent me off to a camp where folks started trying to take advantage of me through the system, because I was ignorant of it. I ended up in Texas, or they shipped me all the way to Beaumont, Texas, for some minor stuff. When I say minor, I mean petty stuff. I had like a slice of orange and stuff in my, in my locker. Ended up in Texas, where I ran into a guy, Gary Opella, who then explained to me all that was going on, and then taught me how to utilize the system to defend myself. And I started doing it for myself and others, and then got really good at it. And not just that, I didn't just get so good at using the system, I got really good because I understood the mentality of those who ran the system and those who were incarcerated. So I knew how to maneuver in the system and get around the hindrance and that types of stuff that the system usually does. And and so I got out, met with my co-director Anna, and found that there was a wealth of youth out here that was just highly and seriously interested in making a change, and thought to myself, hey, if I could teach this youth how to do this stuff, we could make a real impact in the prison system as it stands today. And so Anna was excited, and we started the Remedy Project. And how this is impacted with the folks that we work with the youth. The thing here is youth. We're educating youth and teaching them to defend folks in prison, but there's a also an alternate effect to that, is they learn how to defend themselves also. What I teach them, how to use the system, how to do the remedies, it's a very special gift, really and truly, because you don't just learn how to defend others, you actually learn how to defend yourself, right? And so it's a pretty good gift. And not only that, the organization, again, is being developed and designed for students to run and operate or advocate for those. So it's for the youth, and the youth are encouraged to sign up and get involved and with this organization, because it's all about you. Because I believe in the youth and no one else. I think that the folks my age and older who have been in the system have a mindset that is engraved, and a lot of them don't want to change it because of the fact that they have mouths to feed and careers to protect and stuff like that. A lot of them are not interested in doing anything differently. And so I think that the youth who is innocent and is invested heavily in this because it's their future, I'm willing to work with them to make the real change. And some of the folks like on the panel who, I believe are doing pretty good job. I'm not saying everyone of an older age is stuck, but a lot of them are, and I'm happy to work with folks and see folks who are doing good daily, in the system. Thank you.
I'll answer the second question first, since that's a shorter answer. So within my organization, the National Coalition on School Diversity, we try to be intentional about partnering with organizations that are going to center youth voice and help us find youth to engage with. I will say that I just feel like we should be doing more. Especially when it comes to school diversity, because we are not in school. We need to talk to the people who are there and figure out what integration looks like in reality. So we have Integrate NYC's 5 R's of real integration that we try to go by. But deeper than the 5 R's is what that looks like every day in school, what it looks like when you're walking in the hall, what it looks like when you're sitting in class. And we can only get that from people who are actually living it or have, just come out of that. So I do feel like we should be doing more. And we have tried recently in our strategic planning process to figure out how we can do more. So it's something we're actively working toward. But I'll definitely say we're not at the level we should be yet. And that's just being completely honest. How I got into this work. So I went to law school thinking I was not going to practice law ever. I thought I was going to go into communications and just have a JD to make more money as like a vanity title. And then I got to law school and my crim law teacher was like, girl, why do you come to my class an hour late every day? And which I did, which was rude. But I told her, I said, it's really hard to come into crim and read these cases at 9 in the morning about Black people's rights being taken away and the Supreme Court saying that's okay. You guys can keep on doing this. And she was like, okay, I understand. So we formed a really deep bond after that. And she invited me to this pilot class that she was doing with 10 students, which was a policing class. And I was like, policing, girl, please, goodbye. But she was like, no, just try it. So what we did was we all had an assigned area, and mine was adolescent development. We would go to the police academy in DC and teach classes to the recruits. So when we would teach these classes, I would be trying to teach the recruits that you cannot body slam a 10-year-old because you think they're 31. You cannot do that because their brain is not fully developed. And the way that an adult is going to be traumatized by that is very different than the way a 10-year-old is going to be traumatized by that, because they are still forming their brain. So it's trauma to both. The trauma to the 10-year-old is a bit more severe. The response I got from officers: well, if I get a call about kids loitering at Union Station and I'm trying to break up a domestic dispute, I'm kind of mad that I've got to answer that call. And I'm like, what does that have to do with the child? So I encountered a lot of frustration there. And my final project for that class was to write a paper basically about adolescent youth relations. I took it a step further. I created a toolkit on how police could have positive interactions with youth. And I ended up implementing my toolkit through a workshop throughout my third year of law school, where we brought kids from DC together with police officers and just had an open conversation. I had adult advocates at every table with the students, but I said, this is for them to talk to these police about how they feel about how they're being policed. We had to really, put our foot down in some cases where the officers were trying to take over, but we prepped the kids very well. We did Know Your Rights training prior to the workshop with the kids for weeks. So the kids had a sort of sense of agency. And even though the police weren't, completely transformed by this, I focused on the outcome on the kids in that they were more confident. They were able to articulate to the police what was wrong with what they were doing. We got a bit more insight. The kids weren't literally shaking in fear when the police talked to them anymore. The kids were able to feel like they had some sort of say in what happened to them. And I just felt like even if we can make the smallest change, if the kids can feel just a little more safe, if the kids can feel a little more like people when they talk to police officers, that's all I want. I can't change the officers. They've been so deeply indoctrinated, which was another thing that the academy showed me. They've been so deeply indoctrinated by that point that I really wanted to just impact the way the kids were processing those experiences emotionally. So when I graduated from law school, I really wanted to keep working in youth justice. And so I kind of figured out a way to make my housing work and my education work center youth and youth justice, because I personally don't feel like, aside from a few very extreme cases, youth can be criminals. And if you look into the crimes they're charging kids with, a lot of them come from school, and a lot of them are criminalized lack of resources, basically. So kids don't have anywhere to go after school, kids don't have anywhere to live, and kids don't have anything to eat. So I just always tried to focus my work back on the epiphanies I had when I was working at the police academy, in that people are mishandling youth constantly. And if I can work to change just a small part of the system, I am okay with that, but I'm not going to ever stop. So any way that I can, I will.
Yeah, so I don't fully know what sort of realm of youth rights I want to work in after law school, but I do know I want to work with youth. I think a lot of that comes from both my mom and my aunts are all educators, so that's always been like part of my upbringing. I'm an older brother, an older cousin. It's always been super enjoyable to be around youth in the moments that they learn and grow and develop. And there's just something very inspiring about working with youth, I would say. After I graduated, I worked at a nonprofit that ran group homes for court-involved youth. It was very holistic and rehabilitative. And I think during that time is when I first started thinking about law school rather than being a teacher. I was like an academic advisor in that capacity, but just seeing like how important it was for there to be like juvenile defenders in the room, and how that relationship is different than necessarily like a relationship between a defender and an adult client, because as we've talked about so much, like those spaces and experiences are very traumatizing. And I think that that's sort of what has led me to wanting to do this work, wanting to be there for people for kids in a time when it's like most necessary, and dire to have supportive, caring adults around. And then as to the other question, so we try to actually like limit how much kids talk in the hearing because their words can be used against them pretty aggressively, but we make sure that at every step of the way, we are telling the narrative as they want it to be told. And then I think on our advocacy side, a project that we're trying to like build up and enhance more, and that we'd love like any of y'all to help with, is for like our No Cops in School campaign, like getting stories from youth about what it feels like to have like metal detectors in schools, what it feels like to have like armed officers around, and how that impacts their ability to feel like school is a safe place and a place that is dedicated to their advancement and not to like limiting their potentials or scaring them or keeping them policed in a certain way.
I just wanted to thank the two young people who just asked those questions. I think that those are two really key elements when dealing with folks who identify as lawyers or legal advocates, to really ask, like, what's your why? Why are you here? So I really want to acknowledge that question. And I also want to acknowledge the other question, like, what are you doing to elevate youth voice? Do you even know who you're talking to? And so thank you so much for those questions. And I do want to give a lot of props to my two youth co-execs, Annette and O'Brien, who specifically have worked to build this project, the Peer Defense Project, to really take on three pieces. One, to join young people, like the young folks we have here. Two, to reimagine these systems and how we need to rebuild them. And three, to design and connect legal networks and tools to actually make that happen. And so if, as things are coming up today, you all are thinking through, okay, well, I actually want to change that and I want to think about that. If you reach out to us on @PeerDefense, our folks on outreach, who will be O'Brien and Miriam, our movement lawyering paralegal, who are also two incredible young people, will respond to you. So that's @PeerDefense. And we will think about how we can connect you how to either doing imagining work or building or connecting to networks or tools. I do want to end on this question, which is, when we talk about abolition, we talk about two different ways of approaching it. One, looking at systems that don't serve young people and then dramatically transforming them. Or two, taking steps that may not be dramatically transforming a system, but having a plan to do that. And so if you all could think about one particular way that, or one step that you think people here should take to abolish systems that harm young people, what's one thing people can do, either to create a plan for themselves or to reimagine systems? And so I could pass it over. And if it's just one of the things that you do, like a remedy process or speaking with folks about transforming housing or transforming suspension processes, like what for you is the way into abolition? What's the step for you that you want to invite people to take? So I'm going to start with that question from Peer Defense Project. And I really invite people here to connect young people to legal services and organizations that are affirming. So of course, I'm going to plug Peer Defense Project. And I would really ask folks to really share our network. Our Instagram is sort of our hub for that. We want to connect to as many young people as possible. So if you're at school and you see an SSRO, you see a school resource officer, safety officer, police officer acting really, really inappropriate, Instagram us, DM us on Instagram. Let us know about it. If you are on the street and you see a cop acting in a way that is disrespectful and you think is a violation of your rights, maybe you read it in the guide, DM us and let us know, because we want to connect with you where you're at and think through how we create those solutions together. If you see a really great organization and they're like, oh, we're just stuck, we don't know how to raise money and we're trying to do this really cool abolitionist work, reach out to us, because we have attorneys who can really help to think through those processes as well. So I'm going to pass it over to David. David, what is one one way that you would say that you're approaching transforming systems and something you'd invite people to take action on. I'm thinking it might be the administrative remedy process, but I could be wrong.
Okay, yeah, I would, so the administrative remedy process that we use, again, is like our avenue into the space, right, to help the folks who are suffering through the crisis, which is the American prison system. So that is what gets us into the space. What changes, what brings about the abolition or the possibility of abolition is the youth who are passionate and want to see change, who have not been put in a situation yet where they feel like, hey, I got mouths to feed, or, you know, I got a career to protect, so I could just join the regular mindset of those who are already in the system and go along abusing and or taking advantage of those who in our society who are unfortunate to be incarcerated by the system, right? And so for me, what brings about that real change is youth understanding that mindset of, you know, taking advantage of those who are unfortunate, who get themselves into an unfortunate situation, that is not cool and is not the way to go, and that you know, they need to band together as youth and educate themselves and understand what's going on and start to push back against it, right? Try to change the mindset. If you could change the mindset of those who are in the prison systems and or government, that it is not okay, it is not cool to make money and or build careers off of folks who are unfortunate or who need services. You know, that should not be your intention first. Your intention should actually be to help and or make the situation better. If we could get the youth thinking like that and pushing for that mindset to change the mindset of the older folks in the system, I think we'll get very close to abolition if it is possible. You know, and if not, you know, we could bring that system to its knees, because I believe that youth today are the most powerful force when they understand what it is they are doing, because they're going to approach everything with a sincere and unbiased approach, and that is what I love. That's what I love working with the youth, and that's where I placed all my hope in. And I love to work with other organizations to continue and would encourage other organizations to build platforms that allow the youth to be engaged, because then they learn, they get it, they understand, and then they have a mindset that it's okay to, you know, do these jobs in the future that, you know, are abusive to other human beings. Thank you.
All right, folks, we have a couple more minutes. So one step that you would say folks can take either with your organization or on their own to really pursue abolition in the field you're working in?
I would just say read. And I say read because an education in liberation, I feel, is essential to developing, you know, a conception of what abolition even looks like, so that you can start working towards it. What reading also does is help you develop discernment about information. It helps you think critically, and it helps you realize when your freedoms are under attack. So if you read more, you'll start to understand more. And when you understand more, you can be a better advocate for yourself. So you will know what they're talking about when they're trying to legislate around your freedoms. You'll know what they're talking about when they're trying to create laws that further incarcerate Black and brown people. you'll know what is going on when you can understand what is going on. So I think reading and being very intentional about the information you're reading and consuming is very, very important. So whenever people ask me, I refer them to like certain texts that help me develop, like deconstruct my respectability politics and even develop a mindset that could take abolition as a possibility. But researching, reading, and not being afraid to get that education, I feel is very, very, very important.
That was probably the best thing so far that I've heard, like just educating yourself. I'll go a step further and say that, you know, as you read, really we need to be be better participants in our communities and understanding the impacts of the systems in our communities. For example, prior to the last mayoral election here in New York City, the prior mayor was going to remove the school safety agents from the NYPD and place them with the Department of Education. We can clearly tell right now that that's probably not going to happen under this current mayor. And so understanding how the people who rise to power in our local places like New York City, not versus the federal government, how it impacts things like a school safety agent. Because imagine as a child going to school and being pummeled to the ground by a person who is essentially a cop versus maybe being talked to or at least restrained, even though that's a problem too, by a person who is not trained as a police officer, who maybe has a different type of training. And so understanding that, to me, that's one step in the direction of abolishing certain systems, is removing that segment. We cannot have police officers walk in our schools in New York City or anywhere for that matter. And so the more we read and educate, the better we can push into our communities to take away things like that in our systems, and really understanding that no matter what you are faced as a youth, or if you have a youth in your life and they're facing something, there is more likely a possible advocate that can work for you. A lot of families I have seen firsthand going to the suspension hearings without an advocate. They are doing this by themselves. It is wholly impossible to go against an opponent who is biased against that child from the get. So understanding too that no matter what you are working in, there's likely a person who can represent your child or you in whatever capacity, finding community groups that can help you locate those advocates as timely as possible, and then sourcing them and utilizing them and finding ones that are at no cost. The Suspension Representation Project is one. I work at Legal Aid. We don't charge either. Finding those organizations and lists of organizations that can help you advocate and not going against these systems alone.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll echo a lot of that. That's what I wanted to talk about. I think I would just add, like, we're gonna be around after, give out our contact information. We would love to hear use stories about these school safety agents and how that impacts someone's ability to have like a fruitful education. I think spreading the word, talking to friends, talking to other youth about like what it would look like to have these people removed from school, and making sure that those voices are heard and delivered to politicians, delivered to advocacy groups, because it's just become completely normalized to have police officers in schools, and that just is not fruitful and not something that needs to be normalized.
Cool. So thank you to all of our incredible panelists. For anyone here who has a question for themselves about the systems that we spoke about, for their family members, several of these attorneys and legal advocates will be upstairs, so you can have a private conversation with them about ways that you might be looking for resources or support. And now I'm going to pass it over to O'Brien, who's going to share a little bit about the Peer Defense Project. Bye, David. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that. No problem. Glad to be here. Bye.
All right, y'all. So let's give a round of applause once again to our panel. That was our defense section of today. It was great. So before we jump into talking about PDP, I think we should take like 2-3 minutes just to settle. Please make sure there's food, y'all. Please eat some food. Please drink some water, nourish yourselves. And also for the folks over there, come join us. We're gonna be having a little presentation about Open Up the Cages and the Peer Defense Project. I know everybody's asking, what is this? What are we doing? What are y'all talking about? Stay tuned and we'll answer your questions in a jiffy.
We're about to start in about 2 minutes, but I would just really like to shout out Jirel, who made this motto. It's very serious. If you like beans and rice, you need to go get some right now. Jirel is an up-and-coming caterer. Let me know if you're interested in connecting with her. She's real serious. If you like Caribbean food, like Dominican food. There's also cheese empanadas. There's also beef empanadas. If you're like, what's that? Fried meat and cheese. There's white rice. Enjoy it. And let us know what your review is.
All right, cool, y'all ready? All right, everybody. So we're gonna go ahead and get started with our presentation. And so welcome to Open Up the Cages, curated by the Peer Defense Project. The title of our event for today is Open Up the Cages, Understanding New York City's Youth Punishment System. And so to speak a little bit about this gathering and why we brought y'all here today, Open Up the Cages, Understanding New York City's Youth Punishment is a gathering of community curated by the Peer Defense Project in an effort to politically educate New Yorkers on how the youth punishment system and carceral systems operate and how we can wage a path towards abolition. When we talk about political education, we talk about anything that awakens political consciousness. So that can be a book, that can be a speech, that can be a cartoon, or a conversation with a comrade. But anything that awakens political consciousness, that's what we're deeming as political education. And so this very event here is literally political consciousness and political education. And so just to be very clear about what our intentions were today, Number one, we wanted to create an accessible and vibing environment where people experience PDP as a network to share connections and resources. How are we doing on that, by the way? Y'all vibing? Vibe check? Cool. And our second intention was to share the guide as a living document and invite participation and partnership in collective knowledge making and dreaming. And so we've been talking a lot about abolishing youth carceral systems, talking a lot about this guide. I don't know if y'all see like the little pages posted on different pillars. We have a table set over there with our guide, but this is what we've been building for a year. And we want to continue to build it, right? It's not the end all be all. Abolition and everything that we fight for is, we're all taking this as an approach, right? We know that like we don't have the exact solution to it, but we know that something's got to happen. And so we also know that we're going to continue to build knowledge, right? Knowledge continues to evolve and grow. And so we invite all of y'all, like you said, if there's anything that's activating you, if there's any thoughts that are sparking in your mind, the abolition guide is being published, but it doesn't end here. And we hope to continue to publish new versions. We hope to add new knowledge, and we hope to have all of y'all included in that process. Cool? Awesome. And so this is our lovely peer defense project. We had this photo shoot like 2 weeks ago. But this is our team and some of the fellows that were a part of the making of this. And so we'll be talking about all the people, who they do and what they do. But really in general, if anybody ever asks you, what is the Peer Defense Project and what does the Peer Defense Project do? We design legal tools to build youth power and dignity in New York City schools, courts, and government. Real cool, real clear, real simple. And so I'm gonna open up talking about today in New York. I'm gonna pass it to my co-exec, Annette. That's you.
Yes, okay. So to put a little bit of context on why this work is important to us, currently in New York City, schools teach 1.2 million youth in the most segregated schools in the nation. New York City is also one of the most diverse cities in our nation, so immediately something's not adding up. Yeah, and we see it as a thing that's done very intentionally, right? Like, students don't just segregate themselves. This is done structurally and very intentionally. On the courts levels, courts incarcerate youth in the most expensive prisons in the nation at almost $1 million per youth per year. And I don't know about y'all, but I feel like I'm constantly hearing news about how there's budget cuts on the education system, and then you'll see money being poured into departments that we know incarcerate Black and brown youth. And on the government level, youth are prohibited from voting, running for office, sitting on school boards, and litigating. And maybe not everyone thinks this, but we feel like youth should be in all of these spaces and also making decisions in all of these spaces, because all of these things affect us, right, and affect our day-to-day living. And so we see the fact that we're not in these spaces making decisions also as a very intentional move to keep youth voice outside of decision making. So we can go to the next slide. Should I take this one too? Okay. So our vision and our answer for this is to co-create a world where youth leaders dismantle systemic racism in schools, courts, and government with autonomy, institutional power, and material resources. And how we plan to do this is convene youth to identify injustices, imagine liberatory systems with youth, design and democratize legal tools to build youth power in schools and communities. And our values, which is something that we look at every time we start a project or as we're doing our projects, right? We want to make sure that we're not just doing work to do it, but that we're following our values. We are youth-led, meaning that we center the experiences of young people and how young people want to direct our work. We are unapologetic, so the decisions that we make to live into our youth vision, we do it unapologetically. We're inclusive, meaning we honor youth across culture, identity, and ability. We are healing, which means that we know that this work can be very exhausting and also triggering, especially if you yourself are systems impacted or you know someone that is systems impacted. So we see healing as a very strategic part of our work as well, right? It's not something that is optional, but healing should be part of every step that we do. And we are also intergenerational, which means that we lean into the unique expertise present across generations. So we work with both adults and youth. And this is us. We are the founding intergenerational executive team. You see myself on there, and O'Brien and Sarah. And we are the co-executives of the Peer Defense Project.
It's not crazy. This is the only picture we have together. And this is the rest of our team. And so, like we said, I'm the ED of Outreach. Annette is the ED of People Operations, and Sarah is the ED of Strategy. Sarah also recently graduated from Yale Law School and is a barred attorney in the state of New York. Shout out Sarah. And Miriam is our paralegal of movement lawyering, and Anna is our abolition fellow.
Do I give a little clicker thing? Because I gotta move quicker. All right, so y'all are like, how did you all meet each other? So this is me. My planted joke is that is me many haircuts ago. You see the little undercut there? This is me as an ESL teacher in the South Bronx. I'm Puerto Rican, I am bilingual, and when I walked in on my first day of school, I tried to speak in Spanish, and my students were like, nobody here speaks anything but English. Didn't you know that? And it hit me like a ton of bricks that New York City segregation is something that often is said is good for students, that you deserve to be in these classes, you should be here, this is how it's supposed to work. And so that made me sick, and I was like, I cannot continue this. And so that's when I started working with young people like Annette. We go way back. And really visioning, what does that mean? And Annette and I started working to build some school exchanges across schools in the city to say, okay, what are the ways that young people are being harmed? What are the ways that segregation shows up for young people? Not just in the way that we see in textbooks like the Little Rock Nine or Ruby Bridges, where it's like, that school's for Black folks, that school's for white folks. We're talking about sneakier ways of segregation. And so that's really what Annette and I started building out this 5-point platform on real integration. And I want to name that. Annette was probably the first person to say, the most important thing for us here is not that there's good schools and bad schools, is that segregation makes every school harmful. Whether it's who's in the building or who's teaching you or what the people teaching you think about you or what you're reading in your textbooks or whether there's cops in your building instead of mental health professionals, segregation is not something that's just in Black and brown schools, and that myth needs to be undone. This harms people across the entire system, and just because a school is predominantly Black and brown does not mean it's bad. This system is predominantly Black and brown. An integrated school system in New York City would be predominantly Black and brown. And it's important for us to change that narrative around what harm is and around what segregation is and around the ways that our school system needs to be reformed. And so I wanna just name that. This has been a long time of really talking that through. Boop. We created the 5 hours of real integration, which were supposed to be a solution that the mayor accepted. That included the real harms that we're talking about. Barriers to entry. Why is there a test to get into schools that have resources? Resource allocation. Why does one school have tennis and, what's that other sport? Croquet. Oh, Brian told me about croquet. Croquet, when one other school doesn't even have a basketball court. Why is that happening? People aren't paying for croquet. What's happening is that the school system is I'm really upset about croquet. I just learned what it is. But really why that is an issue for me is because we're talking about thousands and thousands of dollars going into one school for a specialized sport that one parent wants, one young person wants, and then across the way, folks aren't even getting their lunch made properly. Folks are having police officers swarm the building instead of mental health professionals. Folks aren't being told that they can even consider college as an option or consider art or consider athletics, something that brings them joy and power. And so this 5-point platform we created with love and joy and clarity. And then Mayor de Blasio made a promise, signed some papers, pretend like he was gonna put it into law. Shout out to Annette. At the press conference was not having it. She didn't think it was gonna happen, and it didn't. And so COVID-19 and the elevation of racial consciousness in our city really had us thinking at Integrate NYC about what does a new set of tools look like to add to our toolkit, to support young people so that Elected officials can't turn young people out to events, take cute pictures, send press releases out, and then not implement anything. Signing a paper, I mean, that's the thing that really drives me bananas as a brand new lawyer. Signing a paper in front of young people that you're about to do something and then you just don't, like you pretend it's a contract. What is that, right? Why are people able to play pretend with people's rights, right? And so that's really how we were able to really think about these legal tools. And so also we want to recognize the legal profession is a whole mess, a whole mess. Over 80% of the legal profession is white. Law schools cost more than the majority of the population could even begin to afford. The debt that underrepresented folks, as a first-generation Puerto Rican attorney, the debt that we're in to get this degree, unforgivable. And why is that? Because we've created the idea that the folks who can make policies in this nation are folks who are of a governing class. And that's something that we're looking to change. And that's how we work to transform the laws. We don't just say, okay, young person, talking about police and schools, talking about access, here's your tool, here's your lawsuit. We instead say, let's work together to design a tool that works and then share it out. Plug for the guide, y'all need to make sure to share this guide. This guide is over 100 pages of 200 pages, 192 pages plus, that really looks at everything from when a teacher gives you a 0 on a test, that's a form of punishment and actually a violation of your rights to get credit in school. Put that in your brain and remember it and say it out loud next time you see a 0 on your paper. Not supposed to do that. All the way to putting young people in adult prisons. These are all systems of punishment that are not respecting the rights of young people and are not respecting the investments of taxpayers, right? Money is going into these schools for what results? And so we're building these tools so that young people can say, that's a violation of my right, that's a violation of the promise I was made, and that's a violation of what schools are supposed to be doing. Here are some things we've done. We sued the state of New York and formerly Mayor de Blasio, then we just replace it with Eric Adams, because it doesn't matter who's in office. To me, it does not matter if you're doing the same thing, right? Chancellor, the city, the state, the regents. And for us, what we said is that when you segregate schools and you harm young people with such racist ideologies and systems, you violate rights to a public education. New York City public education is supposed to prepare young people to participate in society. What kind of society are we saying young folks are supposed to participate in? A segregated one? A highly policed one? One that doesn't even have basic food that's edible in school buildings? What are we communicating? So this lawsuit, we really made that was sort of like the content, right? But the process also involved young people. So our team here really worked to do an extensive plaintiff outreach. O'Brien tells this story sometimes of sometimes plaintiff outreach is white and white passing attorneys knocking on doors and being like, hey, have you dealt with this problem? Want to join our lawsuit? Not that. That's yuck. That's messy, right? And so what we did was we started doing trauma-informed trainings so that people understood how to communicate with young people about these issues. And then we had circle conversations and invited folks to become plaintiffs in a way that was humanizing, in a way that gave people the space to tell their story. We also, with Miriam's expertise, have built a youth plaintiff toolkit. So oftentimes, like if you're involved in a case, you're like, what the heck is going on, right? And then that's why we have Miriam, who has helped us to design this incredible, beautiful toolkit with timelines and images and reflection periods and meetings so that throughout the whole process, young people who are part of this lawsuit understand where it's going. Because then otherwise, the attorneys just decide what's going to happen, right? We also built social media on this. We've built press conferences. And national public forums. I'm gonna pass it over.
Yes, shout out to Sarah's storytelling. And so we've also built legal tools for youth to build power and dignity in the courts. And what that looks like is last summer we led we went on a festival with this vehicle that you see here called the People's Bus. And the People's Bus was a retired prison bus that was used on Rikers Island to transport prisoners. And so think of like the white corrections bus that be riding out through those cities. We transformed that bus into a mobile community center that provided a listening tour on wheels. So we went throughout New York City, and this was like post-COVID, right? So it was the first time that we were really able to get into community with people, and we started to learn and we started to listen. Then we started to build this youth political education guide, which is the Abolish Youth Punishment and Carceral Systems Guide that we've been talking a lot about today. And we've also drafted policy for Youth Review Board in juvenile detention facilities and psychiatric facilities alongside the People's Plan. We also have been busy building legal tools for youth to build power and dignity in governments. And I can tell you all about it.
Yes, thank you. So part of something that we built is a youth-centered Know Your System social media tool for pathways to abolish the mayoral control. This project is really like learning about like where does power lie in and how do we want to like shift our idea of power, and then where do we want to place that power, right? And how do we assure that young people have that? So part of that has been like breaking down what mayoral control is, because that's basically the law that allows the mayor and the chancellor and Department of Education to be like the entity that makes decisions for all New York City schools, when that wasn't always the case, right? Communities used to have control over like what happened in their schools. It wasn't perfect because like young people weren't part of that, and I'm sure there were other problems. But we really do think that a community-based structure would be better, so that communities can say like, okay, this is what my school needs. Okay, like this is like a support that I need, as opposed to like one person or like one entity saying like, we're gonna do a one-size-fits-all for all schools. And something else that we've done is create a power mapping tool that can also be used as a lobbying tool for lowering the voting age to 16 on a federal, state, and local level, once again, to really break down like how do we place power in the structures that we currently live in today, and how do we rethink like where do young people exist in those power structures, and how can we really hold more legislation power.
Okay, so one of our latest tools is the Youth-Centered Mutual Aid Legal Services Network, which is something that we're in the process of developing with all hands on deck. But our vision is kind of to center both our values in movement lawyering as well as youth agency, to bring something to the community that's not available. The legal field is just as inaccessible as its little niche categories, and paralegal is one of those things. Paralegals are often in the room making decisions and bringing clarity about, what the next step is in litigation, but that field is often inaccessible. So we're seeking to create a free tool that'll be accessible online and in any different, ways to conceptualize information for folks. And, stay tuned, and we'll see where it takes us. Join us as we build it out.
Yeah, and so that's the first part of our presentation. Can we all give a hand to PDP? And so now we're gonna jump into talking about Open Up the Cages, this guide and how we got here. And so Anna and myself will be talking through this. And so just to kind of get us started, we've been talking a lot about this guide and what we did with it and how we got here, but I wanna lay the ground rules for y'all here first. And so back in 2020, 2021, Anna came through to PDP and was like, I want to be an abolition fellow. I want to work with y'all. Let's do research. Let's read. Let's get into it. And we, of course, were like, come through. You can come through. We can learn. We can research. And so myself, stepping into the position of executive director of outreach, I was really interested in like, how can we lead this abolition project? But how can we start to build understanding about abolition, right? I feel like every time we talk about abolition, everybody's like, whoa, abolition? Like, what do you mean by that? What's going to replace the systems? What are we going to do? Like, we can't do that. What about the police? Like, how am I supposed to feel safe? And like, that's very real questions that we all want to deal with, right?
Read the guide.
Right, exactly. And so in 2022, after working with Anna, we built out a fellowship that would conclude with this summit being like showing what it is. And we partnered with the CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies and the Judith S.K. School up in Harlem to found the inaugural cohort of peer defenders. And so over 12 weeks, our team has completed a political education curriculum, which is the guide. We've gained keen insights into the youth punishment system, and we've also created an artistic analysis and abolition dreaming project to present at our citywide youth summit, Open Up the Cages. And that art piece is this tree that you see on display here. So, clicker. And so I just wanted to highlight real quick this photo shoot because we all look really good. But 2 weeks ago, we had a marvelous Guatemalan photographer come and flick us up. And this was some of the pictures that came out of that. See Hannah hard at work. We was in the school, we was in the park, but that was us. And so to talk about this Abolish New York's Youth Punishment and Carceral Systems Guide, we can go into the next one.
Or do you want to start with this, or do you want to just?
Yeah.
Okay.
So pretty much where this all comes from and where a lot of people talk about abolition and where these talks kind of start to become more like predominant in our culture is after the murder of Trayvon Martin in 2012 and the 2013 acquittal of his killer, George Zimmerman. That sparked the Black Lives Matter movement. Has anybody ever heard of the Black Lives Matter movement? I hope you all have. But pretty much this was a big movement in the United States and globally, really, just talking about policing and just how all these different systems impact Black people. And so oftentimes, you know, when we look at Black Lives Matter and when we look at the temperament that we are today, I feel like it's something, I don't know about y'all, but like as a young person, when I'm typically in spaces with older people, they're like, we got to look towards the youth for tomorrow and they're the people of tomorrow. But like Black Lives Matter movement started because of youth, right? It was because of the killing of a young person, and young people across the nation took to the streets and said that we need to do something so that people can really start to talk about these issues. And so young people have always been on the front lines. Young people will continue to be on the front lines. And these are young people here talking about how young people are impacted. And so the quick table of contents summary of our abolition guide is that we talk about language, we talk about the history of criminalization, we talk about how the system works and where are youth incarcerated. We also explored how the system harms people. And what does abolition mean? Do we tinker with the system or do we tear it down? Followed by an amazing Know Your Rights section that was contributed to us by the the Suspensions Representation Project. And we talk a little bit about what PDP is.
Yeah, but right now, just so everyone knows, we're not going to go through the entire thing. We have selected a few chapters, a lot of the ones that you sort of see around here to talk about. So, okay, that is our disclaimer to consult a lawyer. And yeah, do you want to go?
Yeah, and so we're gonna be taking a deep look at the New York punishment system. And this guide pretty much describes how New York policies criminalize, punish, and surveil young people. So we're going deep, we're looking at the history, we're doing a lot of things. Like Sarah said, if you ever need to take a breath or you need to take a step away, the door is right there. We also have a room upstairs with some legal advisors. And so real chill spaces all throughout. Please try to unplug, take deep breaths, ground yourself. But we're gonna be going through some difficult content. And so we also want to go through this because we want y'all to be educated, right? We want to give it to y'all straight and we want to be real with y'all. We don't want to sugarcoat it anymore. And so we want this guide, let this guide enrage you, but also let it inspire you.
Yeah, so one of the questions you hear a lot when you're talking about abolition is like, isn't the New York or any carceral system or like juvenile justice system like the best that it's ever been? Because, you know, the rate of incarceration among everyone is declining, but among youth even more. So, and it's been even more dramatic in New York. So in 2004, there were about 2,300 youth incarcerated in New York, and today there are only about 280. So yeah, so a lot of times you'll hear like, why now, essentially? Yeah, so aren't these all great reforms? So one thing we say a lot and think about a lot is that like progress does not mean necessarily that we're succeeding. A lot of really horrible laws have been put into place as reforms, and a lot of things start as reforms that end up continuing to harm young people. So New York still over-polices young people, especially those of color, in their neighborhood schools and even in their homes. We talked about that during the legal panel. And the carceral system seeks to control children instead of providing resources, services, and support. And it also disrupts children's development, making it much harder for them to attain self-fulfillment. So we believe that this is too much harm. And also, progress does not equal justification. So we know that this system doesn't work. It does not have an effect on youth crime, putting them in jail. That doesn't have an effect on the crime rate of young people. And most youth, statistically, do not reoffend chronically or continue to commit crimes, if that's what you want to say. And as they continue to mature, they are maturing. So yeah, so we are dreaming of a different New York where kids can be kids and where they can grow up and we can keep families together and offer supports and resources to do so. Do you want to take this one?
And so, yeah, the first chapter that we open up is talking about juvenile justice. And so why we don't say juvenile justice is because criminal justice, legal justice, these systems do not serve us justice, right? So why even name it that when that's not what it's serving? We've completely rebranded, renamed it because a system of policing, caging, and surveillance that is rooted in slavery and disproportionately targets people of color cannot provide justice. And so we have been saying youth punishment systems as a way to kind of encapsulate all the different systems that punish youth. And so abolish also is, like I said, is a big word, right? Abolition is a trigger word, a buzzword. People are like, all right, once you start saying abolition, I don't want to have this conversation anymore. But what we mean by abolish, simply put, is to take down or destroy. And many abolitionists emphasize building new solutions in this definition. So we're not only taking down and destroying, but we're building back anew. And something that's very critical when we build back anew is that we do it together. And so youth also highlights the impact that young people who learn, grow, and change. And punishment systems include all institutions and practices rooted in retribution. Retribution pretty much is an eye for an eye. And when we talk about the youth punishment system and the carceral systems, it includes policing, surveillance, and ICE. It includes judges, criminal courts, and family courts, foster care, schooling and policing, fines, probation, collateral consequences, and the detention centers. And it's much more expansive, right? But these are like the main things that we're naming as youth punishment.
I can talk about this. So I'm a nerd, so this is like my baby Venn diagram. But we say youth punishment and youth carceral because we sort of believe that those are like systems that are entangled but are not always necessarily the same thing. So sometimes there's punishment that's not, explicitly carceral. And then there is also carceral systems that are not necessarily punitive, and a lot of people who partake in them would not say they are punitive. So for example, having police in all schools might not necessarily be punitive for one specific thing, but it's still a carceral system. Yeah, so.
To talk a little bit about how long New York has criminalized children, we built this amazing timeline, and I brought a lot of my own learnings from my own classes into this. And so really simply put, crime and punishment and the origins are that from the beginning of time, humans have conflicted with one another. Conflict is natural, right? People naturally disagree, and certain behaviors are deemed worse than others, right? And so retribution and revenge in history have often, especially in the forms of physical harm and death, were valued forms of punishment. And so as societies began to take shape, laws and rules governing crime began to arise. And it's really important to note that that also means that it's up to people in power to determine what is a crime and what isn't, right? So we start to criminalize certain things and we start to not criminalize certain things. And so in 1771 BCE, the Code of Hammurabi, like I said, retribution was an eye for an eye. A lot of people talk about this. I don't know. I feel like every social studies class I've ever had talks about the Code of Hammurabi. And then Plato and Aristotle talk about crime, talking about it being, Plato argued that it was a lack of education and poverty that caused crime, and Aristotle wanted punishment to deter future crime. And so we start to see this shift in people thinking about crime. How do we punish? How do we deal with all these different behaviors in our societies? And then then we also talk about restorative justice in indigenous origins, being that indigenous folks have been practicing different forms of peacemaking and accountability for years. White people started to lock people in cages, and that was the difference. But indigenous folks had been dealing with harm, had been dealing with accountability and recognizing that so that we can heal from it. And so there was things like circle sentencing where there was like a peacemaker, they would sit in a circle, they would negotiate, everybody would be able to talk about things, and we'd reach a consensus of how to move forward from this harm. And there was also family clan councils, right? So like family groups would come together, friends, co-workers, teachers, and spiritual leaders to take a collective responsibility. And so if you see the theme here, people are coming together, right, to help determine as a community how we can help people best move forward. And that was something that indigenous people had been doing for years. And then also to talk about the origins and development is that prisons were rarely used more than holding spaces before a trial. So pretty much in history, a lot of the time, prisons were just used as a place to hold people, right? And that was like the main thing that they used. And so during the Age of Enlightenment, European philosophers and religious leaders began to call for the reform of the punishment system. And instead of resorting to the violent physical punishment, remember, like I was talking about, it was very violent, very physical. Every way that you were punished was pretty much like in a violent way, into a more reform. And so they thought that through isolation, the prisoner would have time to reflect and improve and talk to God pretty much and repent. And so at the same time that these enlightened countries were constructing prisons as holding places for African enslaved folks, there was also the 13th Amendment that was passed. And so in 1865, slavery was outlawed. However, the 13th Amendment also provides a loophole for slavery pretty much to happen except for in the case of punishment for a crime. And so slavery wasn't in its name legal, and it's still not in its name legal except for when folks commit a crime. And so you see the transition here. If folks can no longer be enslaved, then we're going to put them in prisons, and in prisons, hopefully they'll repent to God.
Yeah, I want to make one note also about the guide. Just if you do, go read it, which we hope you do. You can scan a QR code. There's a lot of alternative text, so you can watch videos because we wanted this to be really accessible to many different kinds of learners. But also, I would just highly recommend this No Kids in Prison online experience. They have really cool timelines as well if you're not wanting to read all of that we wrote.
It's not working. Please. Okay.
Thank you.
And so in the early 1600s, right, the Dutch colonizers in 1626 bring the first 11 enslaved African men to the recently unoccupied Lenape Island of Manhattan, present-day Manhattan. And so 1626, the Dutch bring the first 11 enslaved Africans, and that's how things start to transform. In 1664, the English capture present-day New York City, and 9% of the 8,000 settlers are enslaved or free Africans.
Yeah, so we wanted to start this history of incarceration, of youth incarceration, earlier than just the war on crime, or the war on drugs, sorry. And because I think that's when a lot of people think about mass incarceration and the problem that we have today. But we wanted to really highlight that it started a long time before that and is deeply rooted in colonization and enslavement. So that's why we're starting at 1626. But maybe we don't need to go through every point.
I want to pause here because this is really important. In 1824, the New York House of Refugee, the first juvenile detention center in the country, is founded at 23rd and Broadway. So New York led the way into building youth punishment systems, youth carceral facilities, and that was done in 1824. We have the Civil War, more prisons are being built, the 13th Amendment passed, and like I said, there's enslavement becomes illegal across the U.S. except for those being punished for crimes. I was
going to say this is also an important one, I think, linking to the colonization piece specifically. The creation of Indian industrial schools or boarding schools. The Carlisle Indian Industrial School was the first off-reservation boarding school. So I'm sure some of you have heard about these boarding schools where children were forced to do hard labor and many were abused, and many die. And so just the idea that it's rooted in this history of taking children of color out away from their families and away from their communities, and forcing them into a pseudo enslavement. And this is also 1922 is the year the Children's Court becomes a division in New York, and this is the first youth criminal court in the country. So again, New York City leading the way in what was thought to be a reform so that children weren't punished in the adult system, but really sort of ingrained this system.
And so the 70s, 80s, and 90s, this is the war on drugs. The late 20th century brings major shift in the country's relationship with punishment and policing. The public demands harsher penalties and sanctions. And so these harsher penalties and sanctions disproportionately criminalize Black people. And it launches the war on drugs, which fundamentally changes policing and sentencing. The nation's rate of imprisonment leaps, beginning a period of mass incarceration. Something that's really important to note here is that while the war on drugs and everything came into fruition, crime was actually on the decrease and was on the decline in the United States. And so this was a real proliferation of just trying to lock people up, for real. In 1988, we have 1989, we have the famous case of the Central Park Five, which was pretty much the case where 5 young Black boys from Harlem were falsely incarcerated. And later, all 5 boys were found to be innocent, but they had to endure a lot of physical abuse while being in the system. In 1994, the crime bill passes. And this was a big topic during the presidential elections because Joe Biden actually co-signed this or was like leading this, co-sponsored the crime bill. And this bill pretty much leads to, this is the largest crime bill in US history. And it funded the construction of new state prisons, the hiring of 100,000 new police officers, and it also increased mandatory minimums and applied the death penalty to 60 new crimes. Terrible.
Yeah, and then in 1995, this is an interesting academic thing, the coming of the super predator, which I think this goes back to what a lot of people were talking about on the panel earlier about adultifying. I can't remember the word. Yeah. And like changing young boys, like the perception of young boys. And this like sort of super predator myth strips humanity from Black and Latinx children in media, legislation, and in courts. And then there's this 2020 study that found that nearly 300 uses of there were nearly 300 uses of super predator in 40 leading newspapers and magazines from 1995 to 2000. With less than 40% of the articles criticizing them. So, yeah. And this is sort of indicates a national and local shift towards therapeutic justice and towards sort of the reform era that we're in right now. So like the 2000s, when the DOJ and all these other organizations are sort of coming down on prisons and courts and prosecutors for just being really bad people. But then a lot of the sort of reforms are more in name than in practice, kind of like the mayor adopting the 5 Rs. So that's a lot of what we talk about in this guide, as well as in the fellowship that we had this year with those students from JSK. We talked a lot about what does it mean to like have this shift towards therapeutic justice and towards reform if it's just like changing the name from like prison to like group home, but like you're still incarcerating these children and taking them from their families.
And so in 2010, the New York City Department of Juvenile Justice is taken over by ACS. And the goal of this merger was to increase the use of alternatives to incarceration. Under ACS's commissioner, dozens of juvenile detentions were closed. And even as reform starts to take place, mass policing and surveillance grows. Under Mayor Bloomberg, stop and frisk was a big thing in which more than 685,000 people are stopped and frisked in 2011, 87% of them being Black or Latina. In 2012, close to home legislation replaces many of the large youth detention centers with small residential programs where youth receive therapeutic services. And then Raise the Age comes in 2017, which passes to raise the age of criminal responsibility to 18. Before this, New York was one of the only 2 states in the country that automatically prosecuted 16 and 17-year-olds as adults, and this was something that raised the age to 18. Do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, just again highlighting what we were saying at the beginning, that just because there's been sort of this reform and progress doesn't mean that it's been successful or justified. So in 2020, the NYPD made more than 34,000 arrests of children, and there are police officers in every single public school in New York, which still shocks me. And yeah, so just youth are really just caught in this system of criminalization everywhere they go. Yeah, and then there's been another reform. So they're raising the minimum age of juvenile delinquency from 7 to 12. So that means that you won't be able to be arrested when your age is 7 to 11, because that's a thing that happened before this year. Yeah, and then this is just a fun little, what should we do next? Yeah, you want to take this one?
Yeah, and so we want to also analyze what are the functions of the prison and why do we use prisons. And in Angela Davis, Are Prisons Obsolete?, she names 4 of them. 4 of the functions of the prison are to facilitate economic exploitation, take the money, take the bag, facilitate racial subjugation, racism, repression of political resistance, anybody that goes against the system or the state, just throw them in jail, and conceal intractable social problems. So we can't deal with this, let's just throw them in jail. And so those are the 4 main reasons that Davis analyzes are for why we use prisons. And then critical resistance, which is an abolitionist organizing group, uses the term prison industrial complex to describe the overlapping interest of government and industry, which uses surveillance, policing, and imprisonment as solutions to all of these problems. And so to look a little bit about where are youth incarcerated, especially in New York, you can look at here, there's youth incarceration sites.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that the 2 facilities that run prisons for young people in New York are the Office of Children and Family Services and the Administration for Children's Services. So just think about that for a minute. That's weird that they're the ones incarcerating children and that's their name. So another example of sort of the language not lining up with the actuality. So yeah, so the state runs 10 sites, and then in the city there's sort of a lot because they're run by these nonprofits usually throughout the city that are contracted by the government. Yeah, so in 2020 there were 284 children under 19 or 19 or younger imprisoned in New York youth detention sites, and this is just kind of how it's broken down. More than half of them were not crimes against other people, which is always something I'm thinking about. And yeah, 138 of those children were Black, 66 were Latinx, and only 50 were white. Yeah. And this is another way of visualizing that data. So we wanted to move to how the system harms people, because Sarah and Annette were saying, we want to ground in the experiences of the people within the system and the harm. Again, this is another reminder to take a breather, and you don't have to stay and all of that. So O'Brien, you want to take this?
Sure. And so what is harm? We all cause harm. It's a part of life. People conflict with one another. And harm can be interpersonal, meaning when a person does to another person or a group. My little brother punched me on my arm. And harm can be structural when the state carries out oppression or violence, legal or extra-legal, gentrification. And so interpersonal and structural harms are connected. When one person hurts another, the harm can often be traced back to the harms which the state and its economic, social, and institutions are committed in oppressing communities. And what that means is that a lot of harm can be traced back just to our government failing us. I've been seeing a lot on Twitter and on Instagram and stuff about people talking about self-care, right? Everybody talks about self-care and take care of yourself and love yourself. But there's also been a real move of people talking about you can't just self-care yourself out of capitalism. At the end of the day, the systems are failing us, and putting on a face mask isn't going to end poverty, you know? And so the real problem here is how do we start to recognize the harm and how do we start to trace it back and how do we repair it?
Yeah, and I was just gonna say the bottom little blurb is about accountability, because accountability is a huge part of abolition. It's sort of like a central part of it in that it is integral to addressing harm, and it begins with yourself. Like, you can't force someone else to be accountable. So it's like, how do we recognize harm doing, have this process of reparation, and like commit to transformation outside of this carceral system. So yeah, it's integral to a transformed future. And so this next slide is about what is crime as a difference, like what is different between harm and crime. So crime is constructed. So its meaning and what falls within it can change over time, and it is controlled like exclusively by those in power. So an example of this is that drug use and houselessness are criminalized in the United States while they're treated as public health issues in other countries and not dealt with criminally. So the states and power structures decide what to label, which social issues they want to label as crimes, and use prison, surveillance, and policing as solutions instead of providing services for those issues. Yeah. Yeah.
And so there's harm at all different stages, and imprisonment is especially harmful. It can be traumatizing.
And it's harmful to those like in prison as well as those outside of prison. So it's harmful to families and communities as well as just like the general public. Prisons are harmful to all of us, and carceral systems are harmful to all of us, whether or not we are in them. There are different degrees of harm. So these are some ways that it's harmful.
And so we want to talk about abolition now and bring it all together. And so do we tinker with it or do we tear it down? Do we hire more police officers of color? Do we train our police officers more? Or do we start investing in our communities and start bringing them the resources that they need? And so why abolition? Not all abolitionists are the same. Activists and communities come to abolition for many reasons, and here are a few of ours. First, no one should be put in a cage. Prisons and policing are rooted in subjugation, colonialism, and enslavement, and they have no place in our future. Secondly, the prison industrial complex does not create accountability or heal harm. It increases harm on the most vulnerable communities, and it also doesn't get to any of the root causes, right? If someone, for instance, steals a piece of bread because they're hungry, and that is because they can't afford to buy a piece of bread, does it make more sense to lock them up behind a cage or maybe make sure that they can eat for the rest of their lives? I think that start to flip is where we start to think about how do we start addressing things and flipping things, right? And so when we also talk about justice, we also can take Bria Baker or Ruth Wilson Gilmore's definition of abolition and replace any system that doesn't serve all of us, including the legal criminal justice system. And so that's what justice is replacing anything that doesn't serve us. And so to talk a little bit about transformative justice and how we take that approach, many abolitionist orgs promote this thing of transformative justice. And according to Philly Stands Up, it has no single definition. It's a way of practicing alternative justice, which acknowledges individual experiences and identities and works to actively resist the state's criminal injustice system. So transformative justice has some goals such as safety, healing, and agency for survivors, accountability and transformation for people who have been harmed, community action, healing, and accountability, and the transformation of the social conditions that perpetuates the worldview. And so think of transformative justice as just like, how can we transform harm, right? How can we move away from creating more harm and transform it into repair?
Yeah. So I just want to quickly move through abolitionist reforms versus reformist reforms. So abolition is both a practical organizing tool and a long-term goal. But I remember Sarah was talking during the panel about like things we can do right now that are abolitionist, even if it's not like, you know, burning down jails, but that's also cool. As long as they're, you know, empty. So abolitionist reforms are abolitionist steps that work to chip away at or reduce the overall impact of carceral systems. So decarceration strategies. And they must utilize tactics that improve life for the most effective and make space to build the new world that we want. And then versus reformist reforms, which strengthen, perpetuate, or expand carceral systems. So like police training, you know, perpetuates the idea that like police should be doing these jobs instead of like other services, or close to home, like prisons for kids in New York instead of sending them to like Rikers, perpetuates like the idea that we need youth prisons. Yeah, so that's kind of what, yeah, so reformist reforms often disguise themselves as addressing needs, updating facilities, or minimizing discrimination. So here's like a list of in policing and imprisonment, such as body cameras, building new jails to address overcrowding, such and such. Yeah, and then, so the long-term goal part of abolition versus the what can we do right now. So youth in New York City and around the world are fighting for abolition and dreaming of transformed societies. So these are just a few examples that we came across while making this guide that were really exciting to us particularly. So a few very cool organizations that have made cool things that we used a lot. So Project NIA, which is Marim Kaba's, right? Organization, so that they launched the NYC Transformative Justice Hub in 2019, and they have a really cool guide that you should definitely check out after you read ours, called the Abolitionist Youth, or they had this Abolitionist Youth Organizing Institute, and they created a very cool guide on abolition. And then No Kids in Prisons is the thing I was saying about earlier, the interactive website. And then the Restorative Justice Youth Design Summit at Detroit Justice Center. They asked several young people and community partners what they would do with the money that Wayne County and Rock Ventures were spending to build 2 new jails in the city. So large sums of money, what would you do with them instead of building new jails? So yeah, these are all of them. And yeah, and then we have this Know Your Rights section that is separated into the areas of the carceral system that we were talking about. And I won't go through most of it, but that's just something that we built in partnership with the students, what is it called? What's SRP
Yes.
at NYU, and Student Representation Project. And so yeah, so this is like a collection of rights in all these different areas. And then you want to take this one?
And yeah, and just to conclude, we are the Peer Defense Project. We convene youth, we identify injustice, we imagine new systems, and we design tools for lawsuits, campaigns, know your rights, model legislation, and legal scholarship. We do movement lawyering, which means that we share and expand knowledge and access to the law to youth and with youth. First and foremost, as a youth-led intergenerational project, we lead through a model movement lawyering. So we seek to democratize knowledge. All of that basically means is that we build youth autonomy, we provide youth legal resources, we build youth institutional power, and we deal with anti-racist practices. And as we build youth power and knowledge, we also engage with movement law, and it's a methodology in which scholars align with social movements. So think, bring the law and support the movement. And movement law knowledge means locating resistance, understanding existing dynamics, shifting notions of knowledge, and embodying solidarity.
David, can we go to the next slide? Sorry.
I think that's the last slide.
That's the last slide. Never mind. That's why my clicker wasn't working.
This is the guide. This is Open Up the Cages. This is PDP. I know that was a lot of information, but I hope that y'all can take a little piece of it with you. We have QR codes, we have the papers, we have things everywhere, and we also have folks from our team that you can interact with. And so please, please, please ask us any questions, take the guide and work it out. At 4:30, we're gonna be transitioning into our moving screening downstairs, but we want y'all to take advantage of everything that's still up here. And so the community pop-up is something y'all can still cop up, participate in, support our people, listen to the organizations and see what they're talking about. Grab some food. We have the legal pop-up upstairs if you want to talk to some lawyers. And I'm going to pass it to Annette to talk about our step and repeat.
Yes, thank y'all. Yeah, so I feel like, so upstairs we also have the step and repeat, which is like a little photo shoot activity that we have, and we want to take Polaroid pictures of all of y'all. And along with it, we're asking y'all to answer a prompt we came up with. So after, I think one of the things that the guide has pushed me to do is like expand what I think carceral systems are, right? So like people think that it's like being suspended or like going to juvie or like being like just like being kicked out of school. But there are a lot of things in schools that are also incarcerate that are punishing Black and brown youth, right? So our prompt question is, Miriam and I are gonna go around with CDs and Sharpies, and you're gonna write your answer on the CD and then go upstairs to take a picture and post your CD and picture as well. But the question is, what is an overplayed solution that you've heard or that you know about on youth carceral systems or youth punishment systems? Okay, thank y'all. We're gonna go around with CDs and Sharpies for you.